Hey, deserving listeners, Love is Blind. Let's watch.
We're really similar with a lot.
I think I would be a cute little wifey.
I agree with that. I think you would be very cute and you would make a good wife.
Thank you.
I think the biggest concern on my end at this point would be the avoidance.
I'm still here, aren't I?
You are, but how do I know that you're not going to get on a plane and leave?
Okay, so when it comes to anxious, preoccupied attachment style, which he has identified as operating from, there are different levels of functionality, and those who are functioning higher are aware and have ways of managing it, right? So one of the falsehoods that I will see people talking about when it comes to attachment styles is that if you are preoccupied, anxious, you need to not be. But that is easier said than done, if not impossible to achieve, particularly given higher or moderate severities of that attachment style adherence. So in the short term, it's not realistic that you can change those impulses and those distortions and those anxieties. In the long term, it is viable with a lot of corrective experiences, often directed or even facilitated by therapists who specialize in that, or just having secure relationships in the long term in your personal life can help one to discard the defenses because they aren't needed anymore, and the trust in self and other will increase with experiences that demonstrate that you are lovable and that other people can be trusted. But in the short term, the best thing you can do is to become aware of the tendency and the anxiety and have ways of managing it. And when you are anxious, preoccupied attachment, as he has identified to himself, one sign of health and function is to get out ahead of it by asking the very questions that he's asking. But it depends on how it's implemented over time. And I imagine that he at least has a moderate case of preoccupied anxious attachment. I can't know that, but the way he talks about it, it doesn't sound mild. So for those individuals, it would be impossible, even if they were very aware and were very vigilant about avoiding distortions and overreactivity, it would be impossible for them not to distort and overreact at times. But there are ways to seriously mitigate it. And once the couple fully understands what's happening, the other person can interpret the distortions and the overreactivity without taking it personally. It doesn't mean that it doesn't necessarily harm the other person, but it can be less concerning and cause less stress to the partner so that they can interpret it as, this is not my issue, this is their issue, and we've talked about it. And I'm pretty sure that after this storm passes, that my anxious, preoccupied partner will come to me and apologize for being distorted and overreacting earlier. So I'll just hold on and we'll get through this. That can really, really help. I'm telling you, so much of my work with couples involves that phase of awareness and apologizing afterwards and giving your partner the benefit of the doubt. Anyway, so he's asking this question of he opens with the question, I don't know if I included this in the clip, of how, I don't know if you know this, but I can't have the clip be too long, otherwise I'll get dinged with a copyright. So sometimes I have to sacrifice bits of the clip so that I can publish the episode, this video. One of the things I try to do is I try to chime in when important things are happening so that I don't wait too long and then I can't include the clip, if that makes any sense. Anyway, so that's why sometimes I'm not sure if I included it in the clip. But what he opened this conversation, and they're, to give you context, they are both agreeing that engagement is just around the corner. And so he says, let's talk about some serious stuff. And then she's like, uh-oh. Well, she's like, okay, but she puts the blanket over her head. I don't know what that means. It could mean that she just wants to be in a womb of comfort and safety, or that she wants to hide partially or something. I don't know. Or just, there can be a comfort in or she's trying to hide from the cameras on some level, you know? I think I might have that impulse, you know? It's like, well, they can hear me talking, but I'd rather not be constantly being filmed. Anyway, so he asks, what are your deal breakers, or what would cause you to want to break up with me, or something along those lines. And she says, well, we align on a lot of things. So she's kind of she's kicking the can down the road, or she just doesn't want to get into it because she didn't really answer the question, but she did kind of, and he seemed to understand what she was saying. And they've already talked quite a bit about this. And in line with what I was saying earlier, selfishly, I want to see these two get engaged and go on to the next phase of the show so that I can just see how they operate in the real world, because it sometimes can be drastically different than the pods. So we'll see that. But so I was recommending that after they've already had two, in the edit anyway, pretty intense conversations that almost never occur in the pods, probably should, but some really good conversations and disclosures, that they would wait until they are in person before they engage in another one, so they can hold each other's hand and that sort of thing. Now, since then, I have seen Madison exhibit some extremely concerning behavior, quite possibly some of the most concerning behavior. In fact, before standing up, before recording today, I actually sat down and thought about I don't know how to, in my notes I called it worst behavior, but I feel like that's not a great word for most concerning behavior. It's more neutral sounding. So I thought I would actually share it with you. I don't know, I'm not going to go into full detail, but I actually went through every cast member. There have been 270 cast members so far, something like that. And we have had a number of featured individuals. So I think we've had like 100 featured people. So I went through all those individuals and tried to come up with those individuals that exhibited the most concerning behavior. And by concerning, I mean abusive, harmful, indicative of the individual's potential personality. Of course, we can never know. It's all just edited. We really just cannot know. Some people can have a bad day. The edit could be manipulative. I'm pretty confident in what I'm about to say here because there was enough in the show that demonstrated something. So there's all that. And this is all not clinical diagnosing. I hope you understand. So, okay. So I thought I would just go in order. So season 1, season 2, there weren't anyone, there were problems in those seasons, you know, like Shayna or Shake, but nothing like what we saw later on. So season 3, we had Matt and Colleen, and Matt exhibited what looked to be abusive behavior, verbal and emotional, during a pretty prolonged scene when they were having dinner after the pool party. I can't know. I would have to ask Colleen how she felt. It looked particular, and again, it was pretty prolonged, and the cameras lingered a long time. I believe in Matt. I don't know if everyone does, but I believe that Matt has the ability, given his subsequent behavior on the show, to change that about himself. I think it was generated from insecure attachment, which abusive behavior often is. So there's that. But that was very concerning to watch and triggering, I imagine, for a lot of people. Also, season 3, SK on the show was either you would say great, admirable, a nice guy, good guy, or others might say bland and unremarkable because nothing really happened with him. But apparently he was cheating with other women while he was involved with Raven after, maybe even during the show, but definitely after. Raven confirmed that, and the woman in question that he cheated with confirmed it. I can't know, but that's very concerning. To cheat to that extent, seemingly over a long period of time, without any concern. We can't know, but that's pretty concerning. I guess one way of looking at this is what's most concerning to me. Why would something be most concerning? Well, I guess one metric would be how hard of a no would I answer the question to a friend, should I date this person? Yeah. And so for Matt, it's a qualified one because are we seeing the tip of the iceberg or what are we seeing? So I guess the answer to the question wouldn't necessarily be a hard no, but would be like no to I would be very, very careful. And again, I can't know because clinically I can't assess, and this is all just, but anyway, season 4, Micah. So what she exhibited in the pods in particular, and after the pods, like at the pool party when she was mocking Kwame after she dumped him, and he was crying after getting, he really, really cared about Micah, was wanting to marry her. And Micah broke up with her, broke up with Kwame, which is fine, but she did it in a very callous way. And then after getting back to the lounge, she was unaffected by, really hurting someone. It's all fair to break up with someone because she liked Paula and Kwame, but she had seemingly no empathy. And then at the pool, she ridiculed him, mocked him to his face in front of other people, and then flirted with Kwame later on, which, in terms of Paul was there, he might not have been in that area, but, it was pretty overt. I don't know, the flirting, it looked like that was part of alcohol and just getting wrapped up in the moment, but the real behavior was in the pods when her and Irina were just blatantly laughing and ridiculing and mocking Amber. Amber was broken up with by Paul, who Micah liked, and Paul tells Micah, okay, well, I'm going to have to it's you and me, and I'm going to have to break up with Amber. Amber is broken up with. She comes back into the lounge and she's crying, talking to one of her friends, and Micah and Irina sneak up, laugh, ridicule. That was a really long scene. Disgusting. So that is what I would call sadistic behavior with a lack of empathy under a number of instances. I can't know the big picture with Micah, of course. So I'm only commenting on the few instances that were provided on a reality TV show. But in terms of what we're seeing in the edit, that was extremely concerning behavior. Sadistic behavior, meaning that seemingly the individual not only lacked empathy, but took pleasure in the harming of someone else. Now, clinically or in the forensic world that I have worked in before, we're talking about murderers and this kind of thing. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the more general word of sadistic behavior where, because it would have been so easy for Micah to just not do anything, maybe internally take pleasure in Amber being broken up with or internally not caring about Amber's feelings. But it's a whole other thing to, in public, on camera, with other people around, and Amber witnessing. Amber saw it. To do that is to knowingly try to harm and pile on someone. And wow, right? Like Amber was not a bad, if Micah and Amber had history, and maybe they did, we didn't see in the edit, it didn't seem like they did. If Amber had been a complete jerkface to Micah, maybe, but still. So that was a concern. Then season 5 was weird. There's Uche and that sort of thing. And I was trying to remember exactly, and I can't really. I mean, there were issues. That season was what I think a lot of people would call the most toxic of all the seasons, and yet I couldn't really put anyone on this list. With Uche, it was harder to know exactly what was happening. Anyway, and by not including someone on the list, I'm not saying that everything's hunky dory. I'm just saying that there's less certainty. With season 6, there was Jeremy, who cheated and admitted to cheating, or, well, I guess he didn't admit, but at the very least, he lied because he hung out with Sarah, right, in his car from like 2 a.m. to 7 a.m. and lied about driving her back and stuff. So there's that. And most people assume that he was cheating with Sarah. At the very least, it was emotional cheating, right? The next morning, with Laura confronting him, he was completely callous. And even later on, when he's talking to his mom, he's just like, yeah, she's upset, she's crazy. And so there was that. But then we hear from someone on TikTok talking, I think it was TikTok, giving a very credible account of his behavior in the past as a partner, being abusive, and for example, pulling a gun and putting it in her face. These are just allegations, of course, and all of this could be lies, could be just made up. But in terms of the edit, not only did we see cheating, but we saw a lack of empathy exhibited. And then you add on this extracurricular behavior that we hear about, similar to SK, all that stuff that came out after the show was over. So I feel like that, if it's credible data, I feel like it should be included. Anyway, so that was very concerning. So Jeremy makes the most concerning list. Then skipping forward to season 7, Hannah, that was relatively recent. I feel like we don't need to go over that again, but there was a lot of data there, and I spent a lot of time compiling my notes on that. And then Tyler, so season 7, abandoning his children seemingly. Can't know, but it looks that way, and it looks like it is even more likely, given that I've heard from my wife anyway, reading the news, that Ashley and Tyler have divorced. I don't know the story. I'm actually curious as to what the circumstances were, but it seems likely that Ashley, who seemed, like a stand-up person, that she eventually overcame her efforts to stand by her man and really looked at everything and maybe found out more information and just said, this is not okay, what you're doing or what you did, lying to me or deceiving or minimizing and or abandoning your kids. However you cut it, you were involved in these children's and these child's lives, so not okay. Last season 7, I went over all the data from the mother of the children and the mother's girlfriend, also all the disclosures there. And it's just like, who knows? But when you put it all together, it very much looks like Tyler. And, I would say child abandonment, is up there in terms of concerning behavior. Even though Tyler, aside from that, was one of the most likable cast members on the show. So, people can be all of those things. And, when I asked that question, if someone said I was going to date Tyler, should I? That one's trickier because I think he is a good person and he also comes from abandonment himself and difficulty in his childhood. And so I could see if he were to be upfront about this, maybe there would be additional struggles, but because I think that if he was with someone that he loved, that he knew for sure would accept the full true story, which sounds quite interesting, not only just with the kids, but his sexual involvement, which is all, the sexual involvement was seemingly just his past, but it seems like he might have been obscuring that as well. That if he was with someone that he felt would be totally okay with that, I would hope that he would tell the truth. I think he was doing all of that obscuring because he was so desperate for closeness, which he explicitly said he was very desperate for. It doesn't justify it, but I think with Tyler, if someone said, should I date him? I might say, well, test the waters and maybe. Whereas with someone like Jeremy or Hannah, I don't know if I'd be able to say that. Now, these individuals might not be as bad as they seem. They might be doing a lot of therapy. They might have already done that in the time that we are right now. So I'm not saying anything about anyway. I should just resort back to the thing I can say, which is that if there was someone who truly did this that I knew in my personal life, independent of these individuals that exhibited those kinds of behaviors, then I would say blah, blah, blah. So Stephen in season 7 as well. So there were 3 people from season 7. So Stephen cheated and then demonstrated a complete lack of remorse, not only during, but at the reunion. And then on TikTok, he seemingly was taking no responsibility. If he would have said, yeah, I cheated and it's embarrassing and I have an issue, we would still have some concerns, but not nearly as much as an individual that cheats. And, honestly, the lack of remorse is way more concerning to me as, if a friend were to talk about someone that they were interested, than cheating itself. They're both concerning, but the lack of remorse is more generalizable potentially to the individual's personality. And then season 8, Madison, which I've already been over. And here we are. So I feel like my head is spinning because I was very much on Madison's side. Very much on Madison's side. Just because she was a likable person, but also because she was modeling so much health in her disclosure and awareness, and how strong she is to have recovered from I think I might have said, some of the worst disclosures of childhood mistreatment that we've ever heard on this show. I mean, I've certainly heard worse in my practice, and her backstory is quite common for clients and really for everyone. You would never know. You could have a friend or a coworker with her background and you would never know. They don't wear it as a badge necessarily. So there's a lot of people that have been through her. Her childhood is almost like hearing little bits of her childhood. I don't know if I was doing this, but I think I was filling in blanks with some guesses as to what happened based on, I've heard the same story so often. Traumatized parents, untreated, struggling, and find substances. The substances soothe and help them get through the day. The substances become more and more compulsive. They need more. The tolerance goes up. The expenditure of money goes up. The distraction pulls them away from other things. It starts to destroy marriages and makes their parenting extremely difficult. There's, the state gets involved, and there's law enforcement, and just a complete downward spiral. Meanwhile, the children are being exposed to things, are obviously being neglected, maybe harmed by the parents. There's step parents that are partners, boyfriends, girlfriends that are being brought into the house hastily because of various different reasons. Those people are of varying safety when it comes to children. Blah, blah, blah. It just goes on. Poverty, discrimination, bullying, just all of it. So loss, death, and so what she went through is very difficult. So I understand it, and at the same time, not everyone with her background would have done what she did. Now, will Mason recover? Yeah, I imagine he'll be okay. So, like I said, my head is spinning after one, how she quote unquote broke up with Mason, which is 99% of that pod meeting was a lecture to him, as presumably she's just there to break up with him, and putting him down. And it worked because he, by the end, was throwing himself under the bus. And then she comes back and says, what did she say? She came back and said, breakups taste sweet. And then she calls him a clown, and just so callous and such a lack of empathy. Now, I believe that the best, if I don't know about her, but if I heard this from a client or a friend, I would have as my top hypothesis displacement transference of maybe specifically her father onto Mason because he was more standoffish. I guess I didn't mention this, and I'll stop yammering, but is that as you're being harmed and you're being rejected, even if you're not being criticized, it can feel critical of you, as particularly for young children. And especially if it's significant and repeated, chronic, the child internalizes that dyad of rejecter, criticizer, and rejected, worthless person. And that whole dyad is internalized. This is the way that I describe projective identification, internalization, introjection. It's a whole object relations concept that goes back almost maybe 100 years. But I find it to be the most powerful explainer of strange human behavior and how we all will shoot ourselves in the foot when it comes to relationships, particularly romantic relationships. And so that gets internalized as they are getting in situations that resemble that past closeness, like when you're dating or thinking about marrying someone. It causes that internalization, that dyad, to come to the fore. And this is a bit of psychobabble. It's impossible to study this precisely. It's a model of understanding human psyches and behavior and predicting things based on the way things look at the time and ideas of personality development. So it's just a model. It's not a scientifically, empirically observed thing, because how would you measure these interjects? It's hard. There's been some attempts, but it's too subjective and too abstract. But it does work, and often anyway. So one way to think about it is that as she is getting close to someone, it's causing this interject to come to the fore, and she starts to feel like herself, as she was in the past, being mistreated by the other. And so she projects that part of herself and also distorts and transfers onto this other person. And she will interpret everything that Mason is doing through that lens as if they were mistreating her. And so, and maybe even because he was, well, I think I said this, but maybe because he was being a little standoffish, it really hurt her, even though if she thought about it, she wasn't really interested in Mason that much, But anyway, and it could actually, I hadn't thought about this, but while she would talk to Alex, she would say that she was not interested in moving quickly sexually wise. I can't remember exactly what was stated, but I remember at least a brief conversation around that. And it was contrasted with her dates with Mason, in which there was a fair amount of sexual talk. And one of the things that unfortunately can be an outcome of a past like hers is the individual, sometimes because of sexual abuse, but sometimes just because it tends to work, so to speak, as they enter adolescence and especially adulthood, that they learn in order to solicit attachment or attention to amp up one's sexuality. And I don't know about her, there was very little data on this, but they don't necessarily want to do that, but they have a compulsion to do that because they're so afraid. It can also be a way of fawning because you believe that someone is going to hurt you. So you just say, okay, if I do these things, will you like me? I've been talking so long that my screen is, eventually Netflix just goes to like this other kind of screen. That's what's happening. Anyway. So, and I'll stop. But I feel like I need to get this out because I've been thinking about it all day. So for her, it's possible that that was all part of that constellation, that he felt standoffish to her because he had such a hard time expressing himself, I think. It's also possible that he just doesn't know how he feels, or he wasn't feeling things. I don't know. It's really hard to tell. I suspect he was feeling things and just has a really hard time expressing it, verbally especially. And so she felt that distance, was hurt by it, was pursuing for reassurance, not because she liked him, but because she equates like or romantic attention or something as safety, right? Which would make sense given someone with history like hers, potentially. So anyway, as she's interacting with him, she feels like she is herself as a kid being abandoned by a distant father, right? And sees everything through that lens. But the weird thing about projected identification is that we are projecting as a fantasy, but the reality is we are both. We are both feeling like we were when we were children, that of a neglected, abused, harmed child. But also, we are the neglecting criticizer. We are the abandoning, rejecting criticizer, which played out, right? And this is something that in object relations and psychodynamic theory, we have known, like I said, for over 100 years, at least in the last 80 to 90 years, with Melanie Klein and Fairbairn and Winnicott and all those figures. So this is something that has been plaguing humans maybe from the beginning, particularly people that have rough childhoods. So there's that. But I don't know about Madison. I can't know. So just to give you the honorable mentions was Shake from season 2. There was not a lot of data, but there was some grandiose superiority and some lack of empathy. It wasn't severe, but it's hard to say with him. There was Zeneb in season 3 who seemingly was having distortions. We didn't hear enough or anything really about her childhood to have any hypotheses about how that was developed, but she seemed to be operating from some very severe distortions that resulted in her feeling very, very hurt and very harmed, which resulted in her getting angry and hostile and harmful and unfair. And she had this vision, this memory in her mind of the cuties scene that was completely different from what we actually saw. Then another person was Brittany in season 7. We would later find, Leo and Brittany, we would later find out that allegedly she had a boyfriend before and after the pods and was cheating and went to Miami with Leo. And this guy came forward and said, so I was with Brittany that whole time, and she told me that she was going to Miami with friends, and I didn't know she was going on a reality TV show to find her husband. Like, that's pretty awful. Now, we don't know the circumstances, but it looked like it was credible, pretty shady behavior. But who knows? The guy could be lying. So those are just honorable mentions. There are other people too, but I just thought I would mention that. I don't know. What do you think of that list? Anyone that you think should be added? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious. And if you want to have conversations about it, because sometimes I forget all the details, and I didn't have time to actually go back and watch all the seasons and kind of remind myself. So, and again, remember to take it easy. These are human beings, and for sure don't go after them personally. But when you're talking about them, keep in mind that they're human. And if any of us, including myself, were to be on a show like this, there would be people on YouTube that would, in all likelihood, have understandable or viable reason to put me or all of us on a list like this. So it's just a matter of opinion based on an edit, and really, with Madison, I specialize. I don't know what's going on with her, but people that present like her, I specialize with individuals like this in my practice and in my podcasting and in my professorship. I have a number of specialties, but this is a major one for me, and it's really it speaks to the core of who I am, because I became a therapist to help those who are most in need. These individuals deserve so much love and compassion and help, and you can see how 20 years from now, I don't know about her, but someone who presents like her would have just a train wreck of a life of, and she's susceptible to substance problems. And if the problems in romance and life continue, often friendships can suffer, work can suffer. So those, and I'm just remembering she talked about how she moved around. Who knows? But I have worked with people who present like her who moved around because they would burn so many bridges that they would just skip town. I mean, not like a psychopath, like a con artist, but they would try to bond with people and then things would fall apart at work or among their friends or whatever. And they would just, I'm just out here. And there was no indication of that, but it's a question. Anyway, so I don't know about Madison, but people that present like her, I care a lot about them, like a lot. They can be difficult as clients, but I get it. And these people deserve, these people who have this kind of history, who present with these kinds of issues behaviorally and distortion-wise, in my mind, deserve the most love and attunement and care, as long as abuse is not occurring, right? And clinicians like myself, it's hard to abuse us because we're trained and we know how to understand and frame behavior that's happening towards us. So there's that. I don't know why I'm going into this, but I am curious what you would think about this list overall. So let me know in the comments.
I think the biggest concern on my end at this point would be the avoidance.
I'm still here, aren't I?
You are, but how do I know that you're not going to get on a plane and leave?
Like, you weren't nervous that you'd walk into this pod and I wouldn't be here, right?
No, I don't think so.
I don't think so.
I don't think so, but maybe there's like a...
Okay, so I have a lot to say about this, and I yammered so much in this episode already. So I think I'm going to say that this episode, this reaction video, will adjourn here, which feels very strange because I just watched 3 seconds of this show. So I apologize, but I promise that when we, in the next video, I'll watch this scene and keep the yammering to a minimum. So that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Everyone out there, please take care of yourselves and let me know in the comments. And take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.